men are about generally maybe 4 times more likely than women to complete suicide, let's say.
Some people don't believe mental health exists, and I'm going to be real because I've heard people say that there's no such thing as depression, there's no such thing as anxiety.
There was a recent study that came out that shows that Muslims in general are actually about the same as larger society in terms of their rates of suicide.
A lot of women complain that my husband does not speak to me. Like, we're trying to communicate, but there's a barrier there. They just don't want to communicate.
So women maybe will sit down and talk openly, but maybe men don't want to do that. They won't sit one-on-one like this. A lot of men, for example, which is a healthy thing that I've seen, is they maybe go out and do something else. They go and play sports, for example, and they talk while they're doing that.
So when the Western idea of therapy is kind of encouraging both men and women to come and sit down, if the makeup of a man isn't to face his problems and discuss his problem, is that really the best form of therapy for a man's mental health?
That's a really good point. I haven't actually heard that said in that way before, because maybe I've understood it differently. But the reality is that therapy is effective, and there's a lot of research that therapy is effective for both men and women.
In a lot of sense, I think women do want a masculine man to take care of them and to take care of the house. I think women want that, but then
they want them to listen, and they want them to love and care about their feelings, right? They want everything.
Yeah.
So maybe they should be reasonable, right? The religious scholars have a big role to play, and I think it's something that's not really covered or talked about on the pulpit. I don't remember the last time I heard someone talk about domestic violence, but it's a real and pervasive issue.
Assalamu alaikum, welcome to Zahra Alawi podcast. Today we have Sayyid Ahmed Almusawi, a licensed professional counselor from the US. Today has been a very, very, very insightful discussion that you do not want to miss. We were talking about the mental health of men and talked about many of the aspects of mental health in men, how to deal with mental health issues, how men internalize or deal with mental health issues or difficulties. We also talked about many of the dynamics and relationships of men. It's very, very insightful for both the men watching and the women to get a deeper understanding of the overall mental health of men. So stay tuned. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.
Today I feel like this is a very important topic and a topic that we don't usually talk about. And I think to start off this topic, let's jump right into male mental health and male suicide rates. What kind of statistics are we looking at and figures when it comes to male suicide or male struggling with their mental health?
So for me, like, I know about the US statistics, for example. So in the US, for example, it's about, like, let's say 50,000 or so, a little bit less maybe per year in terms of general suicide. So men are about generally maybe 4 times more likely than women.
Wow.
to complete suicide, let's say. Attempts are different. Attempts are hard to record sometimes because they're not reported, they're underreported. But in general, men definitely struggle with suicide and mental health in general. Inshallah, we'll touch more on that.
And is that equally, does that affect the Muslim community equally, or is statistics different?
So for a long time, we thought it didn't. We thought that because your level of religiosity, we thought would be a protective factor, right? That you would, if you're a mu'min, if you have iman, then we thought maybe it would be less likely that you would complete suicide or you would even think about suicide. But it's actually, like, even from my personal experience, sometimes you're surprised, and I was surprised at the beginning, but it's actually very common to think about suicide, to think about death. And there was a recent study that came out that shows that Muslims in general are actually about the same as larger society in terms of their rates of suicide. It's just a lot of times we don't hear about it, or it's not. It's reported as something else, right? Because of the reputation and things surrounding that we have in the community.
Interesting, yeah. I think in the UK statistics are very alarming as well. I think 84 men commit suicide every week in the UK. ITV launched Project 84, which is a project that's been running for several years, where they focus on male suicide, and they've even put 84 men on their studio to symbolize the 84 men that commit suicide every week. In general, is it socially acceptable for men to talk about their mental health struggle? Do you feel like in our society it is socially acceptable for men to open up in general?
So I think it's interesting to compare. Sometimes we like to compare between larger society and then the Muslim community. So something that I've always been that I've always focused on, or always wanted to kind of talk about, is that we're really the same as everyone else. We have the same types of issues that we see, that we're not immune to these issues. So just because we believe that our small community sometimes, or our community is insulated from these issues. And as I said, because of iman, sometimes because of faith, we feel like maybe, or our strong culture, we feel like that makes us immune from everything else. But the reality is we suffer like everyone else. In general, Muslims in general, of all backgrounds, we all suffer in different ways. And men, yes, for men, it's difficult to speak. It's difficult. It goes both ways. It's difficult for men to speak out. It's difficult for men to express themselves, to even close friends and family. And on the other hand, it's also society plays a role in that, right? Because we teach men that it's not okay to talk about their problems, that they should just go on with whatever they're doing. And we were talking before the episode about how sometimes that can affect that sometimes the things that men go through, just because they don't speak about it doesn't mean that it's not difficult. And we were talking about how it can be very difficult, actually. And when you take a step back and you look at it, it's wonder how did they do this? How family members that we have, or fathers, or uncles, or anyone in our families, how were they able to do everything they're doing? So I think it goes both ways. It's what society and culture has taught us, and what men have really taken on, that this is what's acceptable and this is what is not. I like to differentiate this from Islamic principles, because Islamically it's not frowned upon. And our Prophet ﷺ, he in the Quran, just to paraphrase, but he was accused of being an ear. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, udhunu khairin lakum. He's an ear of, it's something good, actually. It's something good in it for him to be an ear, to listen, because he would listen to everyone. He would listen to their problems, young and old, and people from marginalized parts of people who are marginalized in society, for example. So it's really Islam is I think it's important to focus on the difference between what is Islam and what is culture.
Yeah. Do you think it's because there's an element of men should be men, and they should just be strong and get on with it? Because even when I look at my own family structure, I know more about how my mum was feeling in certain situations as what's happened in the past and what my dad felt. But do you think there's an element of men should be strong, so they shouldn't show any forms of weakness? Do you think that misconception plays a role?
I think it definitely plays a role, yeah. Traditionally, I mean, men, have been, because you're the provider, you're the breadwinner, considered traditionally. And in our cultures, maybe more than larger society. So there's definitely an element of that you have to be strong. As you said, you have to get on with it. And it's easy to say, but what does that mean, get on with it? What about my feelings? What about what I'm going through? So the struggle that happens is that, men, it doesn't mean because you tell them to get on with it, doesn't mean that they don't have these issues. It just means that they suppress them. They keep them in. And when we're talking about suicide, and we're talking about the higher rate of suicide among men than women, that's part of it, is that they don't speak about it. Women, sometimes you can get together and you can speak about issues, and from a young age, girls are more likely to talk about their issues. But for men, it is seen as a weakness. It is seen as a weakness to speak about these issues. I think maybe we need to talk about how to balance these, how to balance. Actually, yes, men do have a role, and actually, it's good for them to feel like they're doing their role and they're achieving what they need to achieve. That helps their mental health as well. But to talk about the mental health aspect of it, just like I always like to compare it to physical health. If you have, if your leg is broken and you're trying to walk, everyone will see that. Everyone maybe will give you room, will accommodate that, and you'll be able to see it as well. It's a physical issue. It's visible. So how do we adjust with the mental health issues? They exist. Just because they're invisible and they're not seen doesn't mean that they don't exist. So managing that aspect can help in terms of doing the role in general. Otherwise, you're going to shut down. You're gonna burn out. It's gonna come out in ways that you didn't expect, or in ways that's not really convenient for you or your family or others around you. So there's a lot to talk about with that.
Do you think, because like you said, because it's not physical and you can't see it, do you think that one of the barriers of people opening up is because some people don't believe mental health exists? And I'm going to be real, because I've heard people say that there's no such thing as depression, there's no such thing as anxiety. And I'll be completely honest with you, and it's no secret that one of my sisters really struggles with her mental health and has been diagnosed with agoraphobia and anxiety. And I didn't understand to begin with what it meant to have depression or anxiety, because I think one of the barriers is that because you can't physically see it, that many people feel like it's something that is non-existent. Do you think that's one of the barriers that prevents people from opening up, is because they feel that other people won't understand?
That's a good point. Yeah, that's a very good point. Yes, that plays a part. Everything we've been talking about is how everything is intertwined.
Okay.
So it's what you do, and that has been fed by society, basically fed on, ingrained kind of in you from childhood. And, that's how you start behaving. And that's how society expects you to behave, and how it becomes a cycle. You fall in line with that. They, treat you a certain way. But if you go outside of that, there's a lot of shame that can come from it. And sometimes within your own family. When you're talking about the get on with it, that comes from your own family sometimes. Even women and females, even though we think that that they may understand mental health better and they have maybe higher emotional intelligence, and in some ways that may be true, but even how they see men can be a problem.
Okay.
Because how women
can you go deeply into that?
Yeah. So for example, mothers and how they treat their boys versus their girls.
Yeah.
Right. So you have to be, yes, I'll give you a hug, and but then I'll pat you on the back and I'll say, get on with it as well.
Boys don't cry.
Boys don't cry. Yes.
That's the saying that I've heard so many times, that boys don't cry.
Yes, exactly. And what the mother's doing is not when you look at it from the outside, it's not a bad thing, right? Because she's preparing him for how to survive in this society. Is that you should not cry. You should be strong, because that's how they'll accept you. But that's just perpetuating the same types of things, right? So maybe it starts with us breaking that pattern, and teaching our children and our boys that emotions first of all exist, and whether we like it or not, they exist and they're real. And what I speak about with my clients all the time is that they're valid. All feelings are valid. Even what's seen as negative feelings are valid. So anger and sadness, grief and fear, they're all valid. It's just what you do with it in the end. But if you ignore it, it's a fact of life. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created these, laws of nature for, these laws of nature exist, for everything. We have the laws of physics, we have the laws of, everything else. And in terms of our humanity, how we operate as human beings, we have feelings whether we like it or not as well. So this is an essential component of who we are. And ignoring an essential component doesn't mean it's going to go away. Brushing something under the rug, one of the examples that's the imagery that I like to say is, when you brush something under the rug, you'll see it under the rug. You'll see something there. It doesn't disappear. So I think that's why processing and talking about something is important. That can look differently though in different ways. So women maybe will sit down and talk openly, but maybe men don't want to do that. They won't sit one-on-one like this. So a lot of men, for example, which is a healthy thing that I've seen, is they maybe go out and do something else. They go and play sports, for example, and they talk while they're doing that. Or maybe they're while driving or doing something else. They don't like to sit one-on-one and just, okay, we're just going to have a talk about our feelings.
And is that effective? Deal with it?
Yeah, it's their own way of dealing with it, yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
So it's, I mean, they're still talking, they're still discussing things. It depends though, it depends. Some of them may still be closed off. So if men go out, it doesn't mean it's a healthy thing what they're doing, right? It could be they're engaging in habits that are hurtful for them, and in terms of like whether they speak up or express themselves, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're doing that. But what I've seen in terms of a healthy way of doing that is going out with a group of friends or going out even with one friend and just as we say in Arabic, just غير جو, right? Just go and just kind of change atmosphere a little bit, or just do something different. And that aspect, it's indirect. So the difference is it's indirect. Yeah. So sometimes when we don't have to put men in a box and say. So
are men indirect? Is that how they deal with things? Rather than, because women will be like, give me an explanation. Whereas men are they indirect?
That's a good way of saying it. Let me think if I want to use that word.
Okay.
But men. So in terms of feelings, yeah, men can be indirect in some ways. Okay. I think in a lot of ways they're indirect. Yeah, you're right. Let me think about this in terms of the context that you're saying. So maybe we can talk about it in terms of the relationship between men and women. So men tend to be solution focused.
Okay.
So that doesn't involve feelings, right? So that's you give me a problem and I tell you A, B, and C, this is how you do it. Okay. And if you don't do it, and if it doesn't work for you, then I become frustrated because it's just logical. It makes sense. This is the way to do it. But sometimes it's not the same as like fixing a car or doing anything else. It's not the same as that. So men may have a problem sometimes. And it's good to have this conversation because the focus is not just on men and how men can improve, but also on how the other side can understand men. And how men can understand themselves as well, maybe. So when someone is speaking to a man or woman, when they're speaking, the man is thinking a lot of times, generally speaking, about how can we solve this problem. Again, generally speaking, because some women do this as well, and some men are the other way. And the woman might become frustrated because you're not listening to me, and you're just trying to solve my problem. But hear my problem first, listen to me first, and then I'll tell you if I need a solution or not. Because a lot of times we know that we just need to talk. We just need someone to listen to us. It's one of our essential needs, is just to be listened to and to be heard and to be understood. And to be witnessed maybe in some way, and to be, for the other side of things, I think it's important for women to also understand that that's what's going through the man's mind. Okay. Because they're doing what they know how to do. Yeah. So they're not purposefully not listening to because they don't want to hear you out, or because they don't care about you, or because they don't love you. It's not about that. It's about that's their way of expressing themselves, and that's their way of showing that of saying I'm going to show up for you, and I'm going to be there for you, and I'm going to do what I can because this is my job. So it may be a foreign idea that I just need you to sit down and listen to me. But that can be communicated if both sides, if the woman understands this and the man is able to understand that this is what the woman needs, then they can sit together and it can work. It can work. They can, and I've had clients I've had a client, for example, and it's interesting. His wife actually recommended that he come in. Okay. Which is always interesting, because the first thing that I had to do with him was tell him, I know you don't want to be here.
Okay, yeah.
So I know this is not where you want to be. But since you're here, let's make the best of it. Let's make the most of it. So I like to start with that. And And so the big thing with him, and he's improved a lot, is that he would not speak to his wife about problems. He would go out a lot.
I think a lot of men are like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in terms of like going out and avoiding problems.
No, like not communicating with their wife, and a lot of women complain that my husband does not speak to me. Like, we're trying to communicate, but they're not. There's a barrier there. They just don't want to communicate. So I think a lot of men are like that. Yeah.
So so that's an interesting thing to focus on as well, because again, it's always about, what I like to do is I like to zoom out.
Okay.
And look at things. It's not as straightforward as it seems. Nothing is as straightforward. So the woman is saying that the man's not listening to me. The wife is saying the husband's not listening to me. The reality is sometimes,
or avoiding communication. That's what a lot of women feel, that men just avoid communication or explanation or anything like that.
And of course, I'm not going to deny that, because that is a reality that exists. So and we see that. I think it has to do partly with what we already discussed, which is that it may be a sign of weakness. There's different levels. The more cultural, and I've worked with, working with, for example, female clients, and even from our own culture. So I've seen the opposite. I've seen it from that side as well, from what you're saying. So the extreme side is the husband who believes that they should know all the answers. So I'm not going to take my wife's opinion. I'm not going to listen to her. The very extreme cases can even be that the wife chooses something and he has to choose something else. These are the very extreme and cultural cases, cultural aspects of things, where the man needs control, and the man needs to have the final say, and maybe the only say in the house. So again, that is one side of the spectrum there. So I mean, while we're talking about it, so that side of things, that's very difficult to work with.
Okay.
Because they would not be coming to therapy themselves.
Yeah.
They would not come. And if the wife comes, sometimes there's a funny thing in therapy where we say that the person who comes to therapy, it's actually everyone. They think everyone else around them and their lives are the ones who need to come to therapy. They're making their lives difficult. I mean, there's some truth to that. I mean, we won't get into that, but the reality is, I mean, we're focusing on you, focusing on ourselves. So again, just to talk a little bit more about it, because it's an important example, I think. So that kind of man will not come to therapy on their own. I think what I found the best way to work with them is to have influential people in their lives speak with them. Other men usually.
Okay.
Other men usually. So maybe their fathers. They might listen to just their father, or maybe they might listen to a friend. And then you have the other side, who's maybe not so extreme, but they don't understand why they're avoiding. Maybe the men themselves don't understand why I'm avoiding.
Yeah.
And if you go deeper, you start to see that it's about defensiveness. It's about them feeling that maybe the woman is attacking them or attacking their masculinity. That maybe it may be because I can't answer her, or I can't, maybe she's asking for something and I can't provide in some way. Maybe I've had a tough week at work and it's not a tough month at work, let's say, and maybe it's the income is not the same, and she wants something, and I can't face her and tell her, I'm sorry, this is, I can't do it because of this, and this. So in that case, maybe the wife can show acceptance. If it's always there, if the wife is always showing acceptance and not dealing with things in terms of, these are my list of demands, or it's not just a transactional relationship, then that can help the man open up as well. I know we talked about a lot there, but I think
that breakdown. That breakdown was good to understand it. From your profession, have you seen that men come to therapy, or are they reluctant to come to therapy? And why are men more reluctant to come to therapy? Is it fear of being judged, or just that sense of their masculinity, that they feel like they don't want to break that by coming and speak to someone? Why are men less likely to come to therapy?
Yeah, so I mean, for some of the reasons that we already talked about. So because of it being seen as a weakness, and we talked about how that's seen within the family. Sometimes they won't even talk about it with their family members. I have male clients who haven't told their family that they're in therapy, for example. I've had them before, those kinds of clients. Or they don't tell their friends, they don't tell others. So there is shame about that. And when we were talking about, I was reading kind of before, I remember in university about how the differences culturally between, let's say, Eastern cultures or more collectivistic cultures, like many of our own, they tend to be more collectivistic and about the group rather than just the individual, different from societies here in the West, many societies. So for them, they would tend to speak, they would tend to say, they would tend to speak about any other reason than mental health. So if they're going through depression, for example, they don't say it's depression, they cite some physical illness. They keep things kind of hidden, concealed, because it's more acceptable to go to the doctor for physical illness or to be taking pills. So that's the other thing, by the way, is maybe some are more likely to accept depression if it means I'm going to go and take pills, as opposed to sit down in therapy. Because taking pills, that's what a doctor is for, and there's an illness, so I'll accept it to that extent. Oh, wow. But in terms of sitting down for 50 minutes and talking about my feelings, talking about my vulnerabilities, and opening up things that I've never talked about with anyone, how can I possibly do that? So I do have a lot of male clients, alhamdulillah, and a lot of male Muslim clients. A lot of them have come on their own, but there are a significant portion who've come because of, a push from, a mother or a spouse or, and that might be a way. We don't want to push them, but maybe we want to encourage, maybe you look into this. And that might make it easier for them, because they're not saying, okay, I have a problem and I'm going to go and do it, because it's a big leap to say, it's a big ask for us to tell men that, you have to be the one to admit that you have a problem and then to go and seek therapy. Ideally, you want to do that. You want to be the one who takes, who takes charge and acknowledges. But if it's difficult, then maybe we kind of nudge them in the right direction. So I think a lot of it does come down to this idea of weakness and responsibility.
So you talked a lot about the makeup of a man and a woman, and how men and women in general deal with certain situations and how they kind of deal with their mental health struggles, let's say. But if we say that a man, the makeup of a man is not to sit down and really face his problems and speak out and communicate, whereas a woman, generally women tend to want to speak about their problems and communicate and understand and explain. So when the Western idea of therapy is kind of encouraging both men and women to come and sit down, if the makeup of a man isn't to face his problems and discuss his problem, is that really the best form of therapy for a man's mental health, if his makeup is not to sit down and discuss and explain?
That's a really good point. I haven't actually heard that said in that way before, so that's a very interesting point, because maybe I've understood it differently, but the reality is that therapy is effective, and there's a lot of research that therapy is effective for both men and women. I think what we were talking about is mainly the makeup of a man and women are different, and that helps us to better understand how each operate within society and within our families and relationships and interactions in general. So that helps us to understand ourselves and each other. But I was mentioning the example, of going out with friends, that men like to do things maybe a little bit more indirectly. Yeah. They don't like to face head on, because of what that could mean. Because of what that could mean. That means if you're talking to me like this, that means I need help, and needing help is a big issue for me. So that's, I was mentioning that as one side. So if we talk about it in terms of severe problems or issues, then therapy is the right solution for that. So therapy can help a lot. I was mentioning how, for men, they tend to go, or they like, especially maybe from our cultures, maybe not the younger generation, but maybe a little bit older, is that, if you're taking pills, if you're taking medication, then it's more acceptable. So the sitting down and facing, because therapy has its own benefits and it has a lot of proven benefits. So sitting down and speaking about them while uncomfortable doesn't mean it's a bad thing. And it can be uncomfortable for the woman as well. Women may just be, in general, maybe better equipped to share and to open up. But that's generally speaking. So it doesn't mean it's across the board, because you have women who maybe have a big wall up as well when they come to therapy, and they don't open up, and it takes them some time.
Why do people not open up? Is that past trauma or their past that they put a wall up? Why do people put a wall up?
So it's so they're afraid of afraid of vulnerability, afraid of being exposed, afraid of sharing, and when you share, when you're vulnerable, you feel exposed, and you're I see it as a way of kind of you're open for an attack, let's say. So when you open up like this, let's say you open up your hands, you're open up for an attack, as opposed to if you hold yourself like this, if you shield yourself, then you're safe. But what happens there is when you're in that bubble, when you're in that comfort zone, you are safe, but you're also limiting how much benefit you're going to get from interactions. So it's a kind of a low risk, low reward situation. Yes, you won't get much risk. There's not much risk in this, in what you're doing, but you're also not going to get much reward.
That reminds me, there was a lady that had marital problems that we were dealing with while we were working at a television channel, Elevate TV, and she showed us the communication. It's now her ex, but they eventually broke up. But showed us conversations, and she would write paragraphs and paragraphs, and he would answer with one word, and she was like, "This is my husband, and he's not opening up," and you could tell she was frustrated because the paragraphs was trying to get him to open up and communicate, but it seems like the more she wrote, the more reluctant. Then he started to ignore the paragraphs, and it's quite, and like you said, then they don't get the benefits because they ended up divorcing. But it's quite interesting.
So if you see it from the other side, how does a man feel if he's getting all these paragraphs? Right? What do you think he feels?
Overwhelmed. Yeah.
It's overwhelming, right?
Yeah.
It's
Definitely.
because it's just someone just speaking to you. And we talked about women maybe sometimes speaking and wanting the man to listen, but they're not. Maybe she sounds like she wasn't listening to the man maybe in that scenario. I don't know the story, but it sounds like from what you're saying.
Yeah. So they push back more if someone. But I'm a bit like that, to be honest. I ended up, if someone, Sarah, the producer sitting there, she probably knows that if someone messages too much, I can't. I block it out. Yeah. Interesting.
So we have to know the capacity of the other person. We have to, you see how, like, as we're talking, we're seeing how everything is kind of, again, as I said, like intertwined. Everything is related to the other. So now we're talking about how we have to understand ourselves. We have to understand the capacity of each other person. So if I know a friend of mine can handle paragraphs and they reply to me in paragraphs, then that's fine. But if I notice they're replying less and less, if I notice they're doing one-word replies, then maybe I am overwhelming them.
That's true.
Or maybe they prefer, I know for me sometimes I can get overwhelmed by paragraphs as well. And I prefer, let's have a phone call.
Yeah.
Or let's sit down.
It's about understanding the other person. Yeah.
Yeah, I think understanding ourselves and the other person, yeah.
Interesting.
So when we understand ourselves, we know our capacity and we can communicate that to the other person. So if the husband were to say to her that, by the way, you are overwhelming me, who knows where that could have led?
Yeah.
Right? That may have helped to open up maybe a line of communication there. Because that was not communication. That was just kind of bulldozing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. We talked a lot about masculinity, and let's really talk about this, because now we see a lot of talk about toxic masculinity and true masculinity, and then the fact that men are losing their masculinity, and there's this whole blurred lines all in between. What is true masculinity? Because I think in a lot of sense, I know women complain, but I'd say in a lot of sense, I think women do want a masculine man to take care of them and to take care of the house. I think women want that, but then where is the blurred lines in between? What is true masculinity?
But then they want them to listen, and they want them to love and care about their feelings, right?
They want everything, yeah.
They want everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
So maybe they should be reasonable, right?
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
But I think, again, with this, there's like different ways we can tackle it. So maybe we can talk about it in terms of the Islamic way, Islamic view of masculinity. Maybe we can talk about it in terms of the cultural view. We can talk about it in terms of the Western view. You can talk about it in terms of, just different types of different ways. Maybe let's talk about it in terms of the West first. So in the West, there's a lot of talk about masculinity and toxic masculinity, and to the point that in general, I don't like extremes. Yeah. I always like balance, and Islam teaches us, to be wasat, to be moderate in everything. So if we talk about this extreme that I see the West is having, is that they're denying a lot of what makes a man, in terms of a man, maybe, and again, I'm speaking generally as well, but in terms of maybe a man needing to show that he can provide, for example, doesn't mean he has to deny the wife the opportunity to also contribute, but maybe he needs to feel that a little bit more. He needs to feel that, maybe the woman would become would feel satisfied in other ways, feel fulfilled in other ways. But for the man, there are there are certain truths. So in terms of the idea of gender roles, let's say, there's a lot of talk about that, and there's different views. There's different views on that. In Islam, we believe, obviously, that there are certain roles for men and women, but there are flexibilities. In Islam as well, we talk about moderation. In Islam as well, there's two extremes, right? There are the sides who want to kind of also conform more to larger society as well, and then there's a side that says no, it should be, where you don't see the woman at all, for example. Yeah. So to go back just to the West for a little bit, so the idea of masculinity, for what I was saying, is denying what it means to be a man. And I see it sometimes in the example of TV shows. Even ever since I was young, I always would notice the father figure in a TV show. The father would always be consistently, if you think about it, consistently, the father's always made fun of. He's always mocked in some way.
True.
The father's always seen as the joke, that the mother is understanding, and she's the sane one and the rational one. Yeah. And the children are just children. They're just being themselves. And the father's there to kind of ruin the vibe, let's say, right?
How you say it, even the cartoons are like that. Peppa Pig, saying the father's fat, and then The Simpsons. Wow, okay.
Yeah. So if you look for it, it's there.
Yeah,
it's there. That the father is not. The father is kind of sidelined in a lot of ways, and that goes really that is in big contradiction with how we view fatherhood and fathers in Islam, because the father is to be respected. Yeah. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا, both of them. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has equality and in Islam. It's, I'm always in awe when I speak about the concepts in Islam, and it's not just obviously because I come from that, but the way that the equality that you see in different ways. Sometimes we want them to be equal in terms of doing the same, playing the same roles exactly. But it does not have to mean equality, right? So Islamically, we have the side of culture in Islam. Let's talk about that as well. So culturally, for example, in certain cultures, it's considered aib, for example. It's considered that a man would, let's say, clean at home, or do any kind of duty that is considered a woman's duty. But we know from our stories from the Ahlul Bayt, alayhim salam, that they did perform these duties, and they did help, and they did contribute, and it did not emasculate them. It did not reduce from their sense of being a man. That's not. So maybe what is masculinity and what is being a man, it's maybe determined by it's maybe about asking the right questions. Is what do you think, for everyone, and it's subjective, but what do you think makes a man a man? Is it, for example, yelling and being loud and being angry and hitting and going to that, again, for that extreme, if you go in one extreme? Or is it holding back your anger? Right, in the Quran, for example, we see وَالْكَاظِمِينَ الْغَيْظِ, those who suppress their anger, right? And there are many verses about having good akhlaq, and there's much that we learn from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam about having the right akhlaq. Culture has kind of taken over a lot of this.
Yeah.
And it's kind of diluted the real Islam. It's kind of made it, it's kind of blurred the lines a little bit. What is Islam? What is culture? So again, I spoke about different extremes, but for me personally, I believe the Islamic kind of framework for that is the right one. Is one of the man kind of doing his role and providing, helping out as well, not being afraid to do the dishes or clean or anything like that. And I know some men who really see that as a big deal. Like, how you want me to clean the dishes? You want me to so it's a big deal. The man being connected with his feelings and his emotions. So not just crying for Imam Hussein alayhi salam, but maybe showing it in other ways. It doesn't mean we have to be crying all the time or have to match the women, you know, on their level, but being okay to cry to someone, being okay to open up to someone, to express.
Yeah. As the Quran, I mean, several prophets were narrated to have cried on several occasions in the Quran and the Hadith. So the Imams as well. So it doesn't make sense that crying is seen as a sign of weakness when it's just the body's natural response to certain grief or certain situations. Yeah.
And when they're mentioned, for example, Nabi Yaqub alayhi salam, who went blind from how much he cried for his son Nabi Yusuf alayhi salam. The Quran, one of the things about the Quran is that if something is mentioned, Allah does not speak against it. That means it's not frowned upon, right? It's not, so that is not something bad. Feeling in general, I like to use these examples from the Quran. In general, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala shows us the humanity of all these figures that are mentioned, men and women. So say the Maryam alayhi salam, for example, is mentioned in the Quran, who says, for example, ليتني مت قبل هذا وكنت نسيا منسيا, I believe, to paraphrase. I love these verses because it shows that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not asking for perfection, and He's not asking us to delete our identity as human beings and just be a Muslim in terms of a caricature of a human being as a Muslim. He doesn't tell us not to laugh and not to joke and not to smile and not to cry and not to, enjoy. We're allowed the full spectrum of our feelings, right? It's a creation of God as well, right? It's a creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The feelings, the emotions themselves, and who we are and our makeup. And respecting that is really honoring Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And speaking about them and speaking to Him about our feelings is also honoring that.
Yeah. And I've read statistics that after grief, if you do not cry, you're more likely to develop a mental health illness. And it's quite interesting. I think they said if you don't cry after grief over death, 6 months later you might develop a mental health illness. So crying is, subhanAllah, it's healthy for the body to do. It's a release. And sometimes we don't understand the wisdom behind certain expressions, but definitely I think crying is a very important. Even after my father passed away, people told me, that's it, no more crying, you don't need to cry. But if the body's response is to cry after grief, then why can't we cry? And Fatima Zahra alayhi salam, she cried so much after her father's death that the people of the city said we cannot sleep from her crying. So it certainly isn't something that is frowned upon.
That's a grief is a good example, because Islamically also we say, inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. So khalas, why cry, right? We belong to Allah, and to Him we will return, and that's it. Understand the grand scheme of things. Understand that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in charge and that we will go to Him. So why cry? So that we have this in the Islamic community as well. Sometimes we can have it, and I've heard it that don't overdo it. Don't cry too much. But as you said, it's a form of expression. It's our health. It's a part of our health, and it is a normal aspect. But yes, if it goes afterwards, if you're crying and then it goes farther, and maybe more than 6 months, and excessively, then it can also develop.
Like you said, there's a balance and a balance between what is excessive and what is healthy. So some of the struggles that men go through, what are some of the struggles that men go through? When we talk about the men go through so much, and what is some of the struggles they go through. And I also want to ask one more question as well, and that is the expression that people say, that midlife crisis that a lot of men go through. And there's a lot of men that I've heard that have said, like, they hit a point in their life where they feel this midlife crisis, where they feel depressed, they feel unfulfilled, they feel all these feelings. So firstly, what are some of the pressures that men go through, and what is this concept of midlife crisis? Does it exist, and why does it exist, and why do many men end up feeling this crash at a certain point of their life?
So these are good questions. Yes, I mean, there is such a thing. It doesn't have to be exactly at kind of midlife. Let's say it hits people at different times, and it can hit women as well. But men, I think, due to the pressure to always be going and not having a break really, because you need to. You mentioned examples for of being without a job, and that's devastating for a man. It can be for a woman as well, but a man in our culture, he's a lot of times it's the woman can choose, but the man has no choice. He's going to work. So it's devastating. How am I going to take care of myself, my family? Family first usually, and then myself. So there's a lot that goes on there, in terms of how what they face, what their expectations are of themselves, and constantly we have different stages. Of our lives, and we're constantly questioning, and not actively and not consciously a lot of times, but our worth basically, or our sense of fulfillment, our sense of and our self-esteem, our sense of self-worth, and it depends how you define that. And so for men, so that maybe that's the easiest way to say it, for men that's defined by a lot of times by their career, or by how much or how they can provide, or their responsibilities, how well they're able to perform their responsibilities towards their families and others. So hitting a midlife crisis, it can be for a lot of different reasons, but one of them can be a sense of, yes, there is the family, and there is that aspect of providing and everything, but sometimes we get these existential questions of what am I doing with my life? What am I doing here? And sometimes that can be detached from family, from kids, from wife, from parents. It can be more isolated, a more isolated thing. I like to think of men as to take it back to when they were boys, because as boys like to explore. Boys and girls play differently, and girls tend to be together and tend to compare themselves with each other and try to be the same, and talk and have groups. Boys like to run, and you mentioned your boys, so you know this. So they like to run, and they like to play and fight and all these things, and they like to explore a lot. So they like to. So as men, we don't lose that, but it's about how do you translate this in a healthy way, in terms of not avoidance, not just leaving, and not just being completely on your own. How do you manage this? How do you manage and kind of balance this need that we have, let's say, as men, to explore and to be ourselves, and to find out really what about ourselves, with our responsibilities and with our mental health. So sometimes that can be a complete shutdown. That can be maybe we've seen the examples of buying something extravagant, something that's unlike them, like an expensive car all of a sudden.
Yeah.
It's not like their usual habits. And I think a lot of times, I think for me, it comes down to maybe a couple of points. One of them is giving them the space they need, I believe. As long as you don't see that they're hurting themselves, or they're not going in a direction where they will hurt themselves, they're not a risk to themselves. I think giving them some space, not pushing, not always asking, what's wrong, or you're not yourself, and all these things, and all these ways where we kind of maybe can make things uncomfortable. I believe even that a balance of that, because you do want to act to some degree and you want to make them feel supported. But I think the balance there would be to give space while showing support from the background. I'm here if you need to talk to me. I mean, this can be for anyone, not just the wife, but anyone around them. I'm here if you need to talk to me, but generally checking in maybe from time to time. So I mean, let me put it another way: is this concerning? It can be the question. I think not necessarily. I think it can be just a part of being, of development, and a part of asking ourselves questions, and what is our purpose? What is my purpose? What is my what gives me meaning? And just kind of asking that question and trying to answer it for ourselves. Let's put it that way.
Interesting. Yeah. I read an article once that said that men need as much validation and support as women, and sometimes we don't see that because we see as women need the praise and the validation. But this article suggested, and I wanted your opinion, that it said that men need as much validation and support, and sometimes we don't feel that, so we don't tell men. We don't praise men for the work that they do. We don't give them that validation. And that article, it was a Western article, also suggested that a lot of men that do end up seeking relationships outside marriage, premarital relationship, is more so for the validation and or end up like speaking to someone else is to get that validation, to get that well done kind of talk that they sometimes don't get. Is that true? Do men need the same validation, support, and kind of like well done? And not in that sense, but do they need that as much as women do?
I completely agree. Yes, I think they do. I think we're the same in a lot of ways. So I think just because, as we were talking, just because the man can keep working and does work and does do the jobs and checks things off on paper, it doesn't mean it's as simple as that, right? They're not machines. So yes, we men do need validation, and they do need that connection, and they do need, it cannot be understated how important feeling understood is. I think feeling understood by someone. And that they really see you. You can have people sometimes who you interact with, who you interact with and who you can connect with in some way, but you don't necessarily feel seen by them. You don't truly feel seen. You feel maybe sometimes people are just thinking of the next thing they want to say, or they built kind of an image of you. So if I have an image of who you are, and then I just in the end I start interacting with that image. I start interacting with what I believe you are, and what I want, what I believe confirms, and I look for what confirms my thinking in terms of what you are. If I believe you are, if I believe, for example, that you are someone who I can't fully trust, let's say, then I'll look for things that confirm that. Okay, look, she talked to this person this way, so I was right. Just as an example. So when you meet someone when we meet people, and we all have people like that in our lives, I think, or people we've met who don't look at the image of just an image of who you are. An image that they just create in their minds. We're always creating images, but they don't look at that as a fixed and static thing. They look at it as something that can be changed, and that can only be done when they really see you, and they really can take input. They can take that image that they have in their mind can be tweaked, can be changed. So you feel like they're dealing with the real you. So we all need that. We all need that, men and women. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us in that way, and we all need it, and we do all need praise to some degree. It doesn't have to be in the same way. It doesn't have to be, throwing a party for a man or things like that. It depends on, you have to kind of gauge how, let's say, the man in your life, whoever it is, whatever relationship you have with them, what they respond to. It's about them.
Do you think then in a marriage that over time that we create an image of each other, and then we don't really get to see each other?
Definitely. And then problems, when you don't speak, problems start accumulating as well. When you don't speak with each other, and when you don't understand, and when you try and feel that the other side is not really understanding you, then you start developing an image, and that becomes very difficult in marriages because because then you're suddenly you find yourself like if you were to meet this person for the first time, you would have if you try this exercise, if you meet this person for the first time, you may find a lot that you like about them, or if you remember what you liked about them from the beginning, you'll find a lot. But there is a lot that kind of starts defining the marriage and the relationship over time, and it's small accumulations of things.
Yeah. And another aspect is anger. I mean, anger is usually an emotion that is associated with men, and sometimes it's seen as an emotion which is acceptable for a man to have as a response, that men are angry and that is their way of dealing with it. And we see a lot of cases of domestic violence where men sometimes will hit and shout, hit, emotionally, physically abuse their wives. And I know a lot of cases, even personally, people really close to me, where they have gone through domestic violence, and then other people were telling them, Sabri, it's your kids, you have to have patience, this is a man. So do you feel like anger is a acceptable, or not acceptable, but is it seen as an acceptable response for a man to have, that if a man is angry, he's in charge and it's acceptable? And in essence, what is anger? Is that a kind of mask for kind of masking deeper pain inside? Or, why do men sometimes result in anger and in physical violence when it's against women?
So yeah, anger can be, sometimes we can see it as like a secondary emotion, actually. So whereas the primary can be fear of different things, for example, or some other primary emotion. So it can be, if we use the example that you just mentioned, it can be in terms of domestic violence, a fear of, let's say, losing control, a fear of losing their identity as men, as what makes them men, and the masculinity. A difficulty accepting maybe that they don't have full control, things along those lines. So these can all come out as anger. Sometimes it can be sometimes anxiety as well. One part of anxiety is that it can, as a symptom, it can be irritability. So just snapping at different things. And that can be misunderstood by both the men and the women, or whoever is experiencing it, and the other person. So for the other side, it's of course difficult, because if especially if it's domestic violence, then you're not going to sit there and try to understand where they're coming from. It's an issue that needs to be tackled. But the men themselves, or whoever is going through it, because domestic violence can be men or women, but the majority is men. And for them themselves, they can try to understand, where is this actually coming from? Is my anger actually towards, for example, my wife, or towards my children? Is that really what's happening, or is it more something internal? I always like to zoom out and to just kind of get a different perspective. And so if I were to zoom out from that, if I was angry and I were to zoom out in that instance, I would say, what is triggering me? Sorry, what is kind of bringing about this emotion and these thoughts that I'm having, these feelings? And a lot of times we'll find that there's other causes. For example, it can be something that happened at work. Let's say, if you're coming from, for example, from work and straight home, and immediately you get to the issues that you face at home, then immediately that can cause some irritability, that can cause some anger. But that's not necessarily related to something anyone at home did. You're just bringing something with you. You're bringing this baggage with you from work. So what I always recommend to clients who have this kind of problem, or in general, is don't come straight home and just go straight into kind of dealing with everyone. But take a step back, maybe sit in the car for 5 minutes, have a little bit of a kind of buffer zone, where you can kind of de-stress. You can keep work at work, and then you can bring yourself at home. Or if you go straight home, then maybe going into your room, or going somewhere else where you're given time, you're respected with that time that you're given, in order to de-stress and to kind of just be a different person from the stress that you bring from work. And that is the role maybe of both the man and the woman, or whoever is facing that. In terms of accepting domestic violence, I think we have a tendency to hide and to conceal and just kind of pretend that things are not happening in our societies. And I think you alluded to maybe religious scholars as well. And I think Islamically, so first of all, I think religious scholars have a big influence and an important voice. And something that I may say, for example, they may, people and, men in our society may not listen to, because, they see me as maybe, especially in this, maybe sometimes they're selective, they may listen to me in certain ways, in certain aspects, but maybe this aspect of anger and challenging something like this, they may not listen to. So I think the religious scholars have a big role to play. And I think it's something that's not really covered or talked about on the pulpit is a domestic violence. I don't remember the last time I heard someone talk about domestic violence, but it's a real and pervasive issue. So we can talk about a lot of, and now, alhamdulillah, there's a lot of big issues that are being discussed on the pulpit. And I think this can be added. This is important. And men who, men do go to these majalis, and they do take on what the scholars are saying. So I think not giving as much leniency to this, having consequences. One of the examples that I've mentioned is that sometimes we need accountability. So, for example, if we have on the road, if we don't have speed limits, a lot of times, if we don't have those tickets, then we will not abide by the speed limit. So we need accountability. It's just human nature to just take as much as you're given, as much as you're able to. And a lot of times, you give an inch and someone wants to take a mile. So I say this meaning that there needs to be some accountability, and that when there is no accountability, then the person can feel like they're living in their own, let's say, their own kingdom, and they're setting their own rules, and no one can say a word. I'm painting this picture that doesn't apply to everyone, but nonetheless, I think it's important to shed some light on. Because I think it does need to be addressed. And when we talk about balance, then we're going to the extreme of concealing and hiding and protecting. And I think maybe sometimes we need to do less of that. And maybe one person's example will serve for others. So again, so in terms of anger, I think we're just trying to tie this with anger, and I think it can be misunderstood. Anger itself is not bad. As we said earlier, that, emotions are not, I don't see emotions as negative. Feelings are not negative. And anger itself can be used positively. It can be used, in a cry for justice, for example, as a positive thing. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't want us to just be bland and not, not acting up in certain, when it's needed. But this is a way where we're not regulating it. So this is how we can explain all this, but it doesn't excuse, we can explain where things come from, but doesn't excuse the acts themselves. So this is a behavior that's learned from childhood, for example, and you don't want to come and kind of bring it onto the next generation to show your children that when something bad happens, this is how you deal with it, because you're modeling all this behavior. You're hurting, I have cases of I've had cases where I talk to the wife, for example, and she's telling me about her husband and how he doesn't take no for an answer from the children. They can't talk back and all these things, or from her, and there can be some domestic violence as well, so, in the home. But when this is not addressed, then it will continue, and it will give others the chance to also continue this behavior when this is not touched on or addressed.
Can some of these behaviors be changed? Can anger be changed, or when someone is violent or they're angry? Sometimes even, for example, someone can beat their wife up, and then they end up getting divorced, and they go through a terrible divorce, but they don't learn their lesson. They'll get married again, and they'll be violent again to the second one and the third one. So can anger truly be dealt with or changed, or are these traits just habits which has been embedded with them? Like you said, sometimes it's something they've seen their parents do and their fathers do. Is it embedded with them, or can anger truly be changed?
I mean, we have these anger management classes, for example, and anger management is a thing. It exists. So, and it's for managing your anger, for learning how to deal with your anger. So some may have a different temperament, and you can even notice this from children, from babies, that they have different temperaments. So some may be more fussy and more, cry more, and others are maybe calmer. So, so part of it is this, but it does not give you a license to just use that, right? This is how I am, and I'm not going to change. So we can definitely change. We can definitely change in how we cope with these stressors that we have. So how we recognize our emotions and how we process them, and then how we end up regulating. Because when you're angry, you're not really doing much regulation there. You're just letting it. There's no kind of buffer from what you feel and what you think, and then your action. So we want some. We don't want to act. We don't want to act. Sorry, impulsively. In terms of the case that you mentioned, for example, of someone getting divorced and going to marry again and doing the same thing, I think this touches on a bigger topic as well. So first of all, it can be changed, yes. But if you know someone who has been like this in their marriage, you don't want to just overlook that altogether. Culturally, we sometimes do see this because we talk about the Tadayun, for example, and how religious they are, their religiosity. We talk about maybe their status or their work, their career, all these aspects, how they are respected in society, their position in society. But we don't talk about this thing. Maybe he's known to have had these issues with kind of abuse, domestic violence and abuse at home. This is something to really take note of. We have to, I think, start looking at these aspects as well, because these are human beings, right? We are all human beings, not just we cannot divorce that from from who we are. So we can't just say look at certain aspects and look at how they are in the community, and not ask about how they are in close circles or how they act, towards people who are family or others who are close to them. I think we shouldn't be afraid to ask these kinds of questions. I think it's not as much as I think it's not so much a fear as it is people maybe not knowing that they need to ask these kinds of questions, or they need to look for these aspects, because it's not just someone who says who speaks of Allah and who recites Quran or goes to the masjid that is a good person. We cannot always tell. And these people who abuse, just to make a point about this, one final point is that, as I said earlier, is that they're not, we can explain where their behavior comes from. So I like to do this because we like to understand, human behavior and how someone ends up being the way that they are. But again, it does not excuse their behavior. So we can be supportive in terms of getting them the help they need. It doesn't have to end in a bad way. Getting them the help they need, maybe before they get on to marriage or that stage of their life, or even then, depends on what the wife is willing to work with. But I think the idea of just living with, you mentioned, I think, sabr and having patience and just letting the women kind of handle everything is also not fair. And our religion does not teach us to be so one-sided. That's more of the cultural aspect.
Well, this has been a very, very insightful podcast, and I say this with sincerity because I think this is a topic that we don't really talk about, and it's very important to talk about it because it affects so many dynamics, as you said, of father and child and husband and wife, and the health and well-being of men in general. So very, very insightful, and I thank you so much for coming on, inshallah.
Thank you.
And inshallah we'll see more of you, inshallah, in the future.
Thank you very much.